thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness to your life.
Welcome to the Thriving Children podcast, the show that helps parents and teachers to put the magic back in child development. Here's your host, Claire Crew.
This is episode number 53 of the Thriving Children podcast. I'm Claire Crew, and in this episode, I'm chatting with behavioural optometrist James Sleeman. Welcome to the show, James.
Hey Claire, it's great to be here. It's happy to share some information about the role of vision and learning and just general performance. So that's great. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. It's lovely to be able to have this chat. I am aware, though, that I may have lost some listeners when I introduce you as a behavioural optometrist. So I would love to start by hearing what that actually is.
Yeah, probably a little bit of background on myself is in order here, so that people can understand where I'm coming from. I mean, obviously, if you want to put me in that behavioural optometry box, I'm very much interested in the role of vision with learning. But as we know, and I think it's generally agreed that there's a lot of different, inputs into great learning, and, it's not just a visual process. So, I've been looking at this, for quite a long period of time. I can admit to the fact that, with my own learning, it was less than easy for me. And, that was probably part of the reason why I got interested in this topic. So rather than being one to really, find the academic, process an easy one, I had certainly had to put in a lot of effort, to achieve. I was never self-identify as dyslexic by a long shot, but when it came to certain things about learning, I had a great deal of difficulty. And so the compensation I made was to work extra hard. So, it was surviving, not thriving in it. And so that sort of, influences my perspective on the whole learning process.
Yeah, because you've got that first-hand experience of it. And so obviously for you, was vision kind of a missing part of the puzzle that you found learning challenging?
It wasn't actually, and I've also had the perspective of looking at my own children, and so in that case, the visual aspect wasn't the main one. So, you wouldn't think necessarily go straight to nutrition and the idea of movement system development as being part of the learning process, but that's what some of these tools that I've now learned over the years. It's not just a vision thing. Has helped my brain work better and, learning process and performance a whole lot better. So, I think it's important for all of us professionals who deal with the human body to have a fairly wide, spectrum in, how we look at, the solutions to problems. So, I've done a fair bit of work in, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but, I've found over the years that when I can optimize the gut-brain connection, that, my brain works a whole lot better, and stress response, a whole bunch of things, sensory, processing, is better. I mean, it was never really an obvious problem, with that, but yeah, it's, nutrition has got, a lot of, legs to it, and, you don't normally think about the link between nutrition and learning, but there's the brain function, and if you can optimize that, then the learning system can be easier. So I'm often, referring my clients to, good nutritionists, biomedical GPs, regular GPs, dietitians, naturopaths. So it's, I think that's important for a lot of our kids, but, thank you.
Yeah. So essentially what you're saying is that vision is linked to so much of how the brain and the body functions. Like our eyes aren't just working in isolation, are they?
Yeah, and that is the story about the human body as well. So another aspect to this is the development of movement in the body. So the retained primitive reflex through bilateral integration, the crawling and walking, through gross motor and into fine motor. So mostly with most of us, we develop our fine motor skills with a good background in, play and gross motor activities, but sometimes there's a piece that's missing there just with general play and general gross motor. And there's ways that I've learned through rhythmic movements and the work that you do with Move to Learn, can fill in some of those missing gaps as well. So there's a few different inputs to it. A traditional viewpoint about, learning difficulties is, the language processing ability and, phonemic awareness and those sort of things. So I think anyone that works in the field will generally not say that there's just one thing that you have to look at with great learning. There's a few things. So, but then there's a few biases, and I'm happy to admit that I've got my own ideas on how things work. So, we've got to look at, human performance in a few different ways.
Yeah. And so from my point of view, James, like what you do as a behavioural optometrist is almost like in a league of its own. I'm hoping that there are other practices out there who incorporate this movement and awareness of the reflexes and all sorts of other modalities like nutrition. But if we're just looking at, base level optometrist, base level behavioural optometrist, what are the differences between the two, and how do teachers and parents know which one their child or a child they're working with needs to go and see?
Sure, thank you. A standard eye examination, you can kind of do that in about approximately 20 minutes. And a standard, examination is a bit like, well, let's have a look at the smallest letter that we can see on the distance letter chart, and what is the distance focusing doing. And you can do that, with or without eye drops, and it makes for a fairly fast examination. The bias of behavioural optometry is very much to look at, well, how are the eyes working at 40 centimetres? Because when we're looking at, reading and reading performance, we're not, sure, we're looking back and forward, to the smart board or the board in class, but there's a lot of time spent looking at the distance of 40 centimetres. So, really logically, you'd think, well, you'd spend a fair bit of time looking at how the eyes, work together as a team up close. And to me, that's really the strength of behavioural optometry, is to look at things like, convergence, how the eyes turn in, inwards towards the nose, vergence ability with the eyes turning in, the eyes turning out, and how flexible those systems are. But also too looking at, what we call accommodation or focusing, at the near point. So, that's the bias of, behavioural optometry. I find now when I've got the time that, my examinations now where I'm really digging into the, sensory processing factors of vision, I'm spending 2 hours with children. So, it's not just, a quick process, but really looking at, the near point at 40 centimetres and, prescribing, for that, it is a little bit controversial. It's a different method of thinking about, a prescription or, close work. So that's what, how we do it.
And am I right in saying, this is completely from my memory, so I'm hoping so, that for a child, that long distance vision develops a lot earlier than the close distance vision? So the kind of stuff that you work with is actually less likely to be developed than the long distance that a normal optometrist would assess anyway.
Okay, that's an interesting viewpoint. I'd have to think about that one. I don't know developmentally. That's a great question to ask. I'm not sure that I can give you a straight answer, but one thing I will say about near vision and distance vision, if you look at, 200 years ago, we were spending a lot of time outside in natural light. There wasn't the emphasis on, looking up close and reading. And, looking at that 40 centimetre, distance. So, things have changed, over the years. There's certainly a lot more emphasis on academic performance, and all of our kids are, I don't know if addicted's the right word, but, they're all looking at these iPhones and screens and iPads and, tablets and that sort of thing. So, things have changed, and we don't really think about what are the effects on the human physiology, with this change. Like, we're indoors now under artificial light. We're eating a lot more processed foods. The natural foods, whole foods that we do eat, are, mass produced. The fertilizer that they're grown under and the agricultural methods are a lot different. So we don't necessarily think about, things just change automatically, but, there can be some long-term effects, and we're not all affected in the same way, depending on, genetics, the emotions, our parents and grandparents' eating habits. There's a lot of different factors that can come into play, stress, and we can all adapt, differently to the environment that we're thrown into as well. So, things have changed, and, it's can be difficult for the visual system, not for everyone, but for the visual system to acclimatise to that.
Yeah, really good point. And especially, as you said, if you combine it with some other things as well. I get asked quite a lot about baby wearing, and it's something that I love from that connection point of view. And I would much prefer for a baby to be on a carer than in, some kind of a container, like a capsule or a bumbo chair or something like that. But, you've got to think, well, in the cultures where they do still do baby wearing for that first year of life and those children don't really get the floor time, their development is normally good and they're very attached children, but they're in cultures that don't actually have written language. So it's okay for them to have really well-tuned long-distance vision. But to me, that work on the floor is so crucial for getting the short-distance vision.
Sure. And what you're talking about there is the development of movement, and I look at that of the integration of the baby infant reflexes, through bilateral integration to gross motor to fine motor, and there's a lot of eye movement control, related to how the eyes function. And those early movement experiences or lack of movement is what I think you're alluding to with those comments there. Is important to how the eyes work. So I would certainly agree with that. And some of our modern processes can interfere with the development of movement. And I suppose what you can do with things like move to learn and rhythmic movements is go back and target some of those specific things that have been well identified for a start, but then go back in to remediate it. And then some high level functions, can work so much better and automatically as well with ease.
Yeah, and that's what I love about what you're doing in your clinic, James, because you are taking that holistic view. And are you actually finding that in the years since you've started adding more movement work and other modalities that you're actually getting sort of better breakthroughs with children from that visual point of view?
Yeah, most definitely. One of the modalities that we do use is vision therapy, and that's a lot more than just looking at how the having strong eye muscles. It's about the peripheral awareness, and what we found is that when we add in things like move to learn type movements and rhythmic movements, it makes for a start, you often, again, you can't promise this all the time because all the kids are different, but, you might have a calmer child, and they're better able to regulate, to self-regulate. The peaks and the highs, can sort of soften a little bit, and, we're better able to access, high level visual functions, with that. So, looking at, not just, from one, perspective of one modality, I think we all have better results when we're looking at a few things and being open-minded, about what we do. So, a well-educated, empowered parent, that's willing to look at a few things, most definitely will have better results. So, not all of my clients go through with, looking at diet and nutrition in certain ways, but I find that to be useful. The looking at the development of movement, that's very good. And now also too, we're looking at, forms of light therapy, to, help to open up the, peripheral fields, the, near vision fields. And we find that when we do that, then the vision therapy, which is more the, it's the fine motor control of the eyes, we find that, opens up and, improves a little bit more automatically, not necessarily without working on it. So, if you look at it, as a development, issue, we have better success with higher level visual processing for sure.
Yeah. And so light therapy is something that I really hadn't heard of until I've started speaking with you. So what does that involve?
Yeah, what does that involve? And, it's not, a common, some of the things that I look at are not, regular behavioural optometry procedures. So I'm a little bit out of the box here. There's not a great deal of, standard evidence base, for the light therapy. But that being said, if you do look under photo biomodulation, and if you look at, research in PubMed with chronobiology as well, there is a lot of interest in, how the use of light, can help to regulate, the body processes, the hypothalamus, the suprachiasmatic nucleus as well. And, at another extreme too is the role of vitamin D in health too. That's a fairly hot topic in the last 5 to 10 years. So, I use a form of light therapy that's called syntonic light therapy. And what I've learned there is to really observe in a few different ways about how good they're accessing their peripheral vision. And I often find that the children that I see that, cuts across the spectrum of learning difficulties, ADHD, ASD. I don't say that I'm necessarily targeting that as part of my therapy, but we're looking at making their helping the child access their peripheral vision and using light therapy. And once we do that, then we've got a calmer child and the other things can become, so much easier. So, our measurements in office, we're looking at expanding that visual field. The theory behind it, is the balance of the sympathetic and parasympathetic, nervous system. So we're looking at, this is the theory, and the hypothesis behind it is helping to balance that. So when we're, it's not foolproof, it's not perfect all the time, but when we expand out the peripheral vision fields, then, other parts of, they're better able to work out where to point the eyes because they're more, spatially aware. And it's a fairly soft sort of therapy as well. It's not, not too much, high-tech equipment. It's fairly simple. And we talked about the indoor lifestyle, before. A lot of us aren't spending enough time in natural light on a regular basis, not for long periods of time, but just little bits. So, we've certainly heard the fear about, the dangers of, excessive, UV light, but we don't hear about some of the benefits of, daily, regular, exposure as well. It's a bit hard in the middle of winter, but, that can be a key thing for health in general.
And so what would your recommendation be? Obviously, it sounds like you wouldn't suggest that we all need to wear sunglasses outside. And actually, quite recently, I've seen, I don't know whether it's gone through or not, or whether it's just been in discussion, but they're talking about bringing in sunglass policies for children at schools as well as the hat policies here in Australia. So what are your thoughts on all of that? And what is the ideal amount of sun exposure for our eyes?
I think it all varies. It's a light exposure for the whole body. Is quite important. Obviously, if you look directly in the sun, you're going to do damage to your eyes. Obviously, if you get sunburn, that can do damage to the body. So it's a very fine line. I think it's quite bio-individual as well. We're all not the same, but I'm talking about trace amounts of sun, or forms of light on a regular basis. So most days of the week. I know that when I'm working, throughout wintertime, I'm hopping into the car, driving to work, hopping out of the car, and I'm only spending maybe, a minute or 2 minutes, outside in direct light. So, it's trace amounts of sun on a regular basis is quite important as well. That being said, there is some, standard research on myopia. We can talk about short-sightedness now where, our younger ones and our adults have difficulty with their far vision. There's some very good research now to suggest that, spending 12 hours a week, I think I've got the figures right here, 12 hours a week, in natural light, can be very beneficial, for reducing, the progression of myopia. So, you can look at, it depends on which medical professional, which health professional you talk to. There is some very good research about that we do need light. The actual amounts, I think, is open to discussion. But, so covering up completely with sunscreen and sunglasses and hats full-time is, I don't think it's, it's way overkill. So, overkill. For me, my personal opinion, that's going too far, definitely.
Yeah, not ideal. And what I love there when you were talking about the light therapy is very much, it sounds like yet another tool which is helping children to, from the visual point of view, essentially helping them to feel more safe and secure in the world. And, recognizing that everyone that you see is an individual and that I guess different tools are going to, play out in different ways in each person, but they're all different strategies and different things that you can play around with and have a go.
Sure. One of the experiences I've just come back from the Learning Differences convention in Sydney, and there was the world-renowned neurologist, Professor John Stein from the UK talking. And he would be the first he talks a lot about, the vision and the learning process, but he would be the first person to suggest that, what we're dealing with is multifactorial problems, and you need different solutions for different children, and it's not just a one size fits all as far as improving learning and reading. So from his research, he does talk a lot about vision, and he talks specifically about magnocellular function and how to optimize with that. So one of the things he's extensively looked at is, the role of coloured lenses, and specifically for him, that's blue tints and yellow tints. And he's also looked at the role of omega-3 fish oils and the consumption of fish. And he's also looked at things like the adverse effect of, immune system problems, on learning, as well, and also looking at rhythm, training as well. So I think it behoves all of us as professionals to cast the net, a bit wide rather than just looking at language, processing, difficulties, only for sure. And that being said, I can also, I've also used, tinted lenses, in my practice, and I've used the English technology called Cerium precision tints, and there's a percentage of the population that do, respond positively to a precision tint. And Professor Stein has looked extensively at blue and yellow. We find in our experience now that it's a lot more colours can be included in that, and being the devil's advocate, you can say is using colour tints the best way to alleviate certain symptoms of dyslexia, not necessarily curing dyslexia or treating dyslexia, but softening some of the symptoms, such as the print moving on the page, distortions on the page, but also to things like, headaches and sore eyes. So, that's been a fascinating learning experience for me in the last 5 years, as looking at the precision tints. But yeah, sure, you can certainly argue, is that the best way? Is there a better way to do it? But, we certainly do have a lot of thankful parents when we can, moderate their symptoms, but also too now what we're, yeah, thank you for sure. But, absolutely. And
that's the thing. I think any time that you can, remove some of that fatigue that children are having, children who, for whatever reason, their eyes aren't kind of up to the job, often we can kind of see it in them. Their eyes might be watery or red, or, they might be rubbing them lots. They might complain of headaches. All of those things are going to make it really hard for those children to stay on top of their schoolwork, especially when, in my mind, we're often asking them to do things in the classroom at an age that they're not yet developmentally ready for.
I would certainly tend to agree with that. We can, rush things. Some people are ready for it. Some of the children, are not so far. So, with our school system, they all sort of, going to school at approximately, 5 years of age. And some of the research I hear is that some of the, the eye functions perhaps aren't quite ready until 10 years of age. And, so we could see, some of the kids go into an avoidance pattern. Other kids sort of knuckle down and they're happy to work, for 2 or 3 times harder, 2 or 3 times longer, and, make compensations to cope with, the fact that developmentally they aren't quite ready for that. So, that's an important feature as well.
Yeah, and that's something that we don't actually always recognise as teachers and as parents as well. So they might be, as you said, putting in 3 times the effort, but we're not seeing that. We're just seeing the fact that they're not meeting the outcomes or the expectations that we have in place for them, and perhaps getting frustrated or perhaps feeling like they're not putting in enough effort, when in fact the opposite is often true.
One of the things that when I'm doing my in-depth assessment of binocular vision or eye teaming is that, I'm able to, have a look at the eyes and sort of see how they're making compensations, how they're using the effort. So a lot of these children that I do see, they're working twice as hard, but they're also getting that lazy tag as well from maybe their teacher, maybe, their parents as well. So, I'm able to look at, how's their vergence control? How easy is that working? And for me, that sort of, gives me an indication of how well their visual processing, is working. And I can perhaps try to reframe it, for the parent to go, they're actually working, really quite hard with the developmental skills that they've got. So, I can give some context to the parent about, perhaps why they're not, learning as easily. And, that can be quite informative, I think, for the aware parent, as well. So, definitely.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful. Firstly, that you can actually, be doing tests and observations and things that actually give you that feedback, but then to be able to share it with families, I'm sure a lot sort of go, oh, wow, we had no idea that it was to that extent.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it can come as quite a shock to the parent as well when I definitely, ask for the parent to come into the room and observe, what I'm doing and checking out the ease and automaticity of their visual skills. And, a motivated, empowered parent can achieve, quite a lot to improve, their overall, child's progress. So I love it when parents are very motivated. It certainly makes, our job as therapists in different ways, so much better when the parent is, on board as well too.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a parent who is coming along to a behavioural optometrist or someone like you, James, obviously there's going to be a whole lot of information they get about how the child's eyes function, and where deficits may be or areas that need a bit more support. You've talked about coloured lenses, so that's sometimes something that a child will have in order to help reduce that fatigue and help with the literacy-based learning. Sometimes, from my understanding, children also get glasses that enlarge that print. Is that correct?
Sure. I think it's, I like to work from, easier solutions for harder, start with the easy things that parents can do. And, color lenses have got a place, I feel, but also the low plus lenses which are very low powered. They're not very strong at all, but, they can help, when we're looking at a page with lots of, words, letters, numbers, it's quite a complex visual field. And, what these, tools can do is that they help to, make the page easier to navigate. So we're talking about low plus lenses. Others of my behavioural optometry colleagues, also look at, yoked prisms as well, but also precision colour tints. And the benefit, if it's appropriate, it's not always appropriate, but if it is, it's a passive tool. It's not something that needs a therapy to, with lots of in-office visits. It's passive, and what we find is that, if they're having a big effect, the child will naturally want to wear them without a lot of, preempting, from the parents. So, we can start with the easier solutions, which is a pair of glasses, and then progress into the other therapies if we feel all the children are different, and we're looking at different solutions for sure. It's one thing perhaps that a standard optometrist could be looking at the low plus lenses. I mean, that's where I started on the behavioural optometry journey, but you do have to be aware of giving the right power, just the right amount, who we're going to pick. And one of the skills that I've developed over the years, thanks to behavioural optometry, is to go, well, this is going to make a big difference, to the child's performance, or it might just be a little bit, like 10 to 20%. And is that the best place to start? Do we need to look at some other non-visual, interventions, or do we need to progress to, vision therapy or motor system, development, to have the biggest effect? So different things for different children, most definitely.
Yeah, and do you or other behavioural optometrists do sort of eye exercises that kids do at home?
Yeah, certainly. And, there's, vision therapy, and that's more than just, strong eye muscles. And, it's more than just a, eye aerobic type concept. It's spatial awareness as well. So certainly, the motor system development, you want that part of it sorted out. We look at, how they're working their central and peripheral vision. That's a key element, to it as well. So it's not just an eye muscle, eye pointing, eye strength, routine. It's the spatial awareness and looking at peripherals. So, it is, fairly involved, but it's a different concept to just, having lazy eyes and trying to strengthen them up as well. So, and then there's getting the, the different ideas that we have, in a particular order to get the best results in the shortest period of time. So, some of the kids that we see, done different therapies for, long periods of time. We try to make it shorter where we can. And, a key thing is for us to have the right models of care and a parent on board that can do the home therapy on a 5 to 7 days a week, which is pretty difficult. That's quite demanding. But if we're thinking about from a neuroplasticity viewpoint, that regularity of working on visual awareness is fairly key to that process.
Absolutely. I second that. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's probably what people find the hardest, probably what you're asking families to do at home and what I'm asking families to do at home is really, really simple. It's not complex, but it can still be hard because it's requiring that daily effort. It's requiring people to incorporate it into their family rituals.
Absolutely, for sure. And some of the best successes we've had is where the grandparent gets involved. So, for a lot of families, we're both working, to some degree, and that can take away time to, nurture our family and to look at some of these activities that are not just school-based. So, I can think of a couple of situations where the grandparents got involved to help to drive the change, and to support the family and to, that regular home practice with some of the, movements and ideas that we've got. So, it's certainly a different world these days compared to 30 or 40 years ago when we had more time. And but I think we all like to drive, how quickly can we make this change? And it's quite exciting and quite addictive when we can, do that and make the learning process an easier one for children. And I can also say for adults as well too, for sure.
Yeah. And so in wrapping up, James, can you maybe make a couple of recommendations for us for how we can actually help our children to have good visual development, sort of from the get-go?
Sure. I could perhaps recommend a couple of books that really go in depth on this topic. I love the ideas with the move to learn. Barbara Fallon, I love those ideas. Putting our modern technologies in the right perspective. We've gained a lot of convenience, but there's been some backtracking on certain of how the human body responds to that and how perhaps it can respond negatively. So while we move ahead, we've also got to think of some of the downsides of, some of the things that we do. So I love Move to Learn, the School Floors book particularly. I love to recommend that for parents. I love to, there's the Toddler Kindy Jimbaroo, classes as well that looks at a lot at movement development.
Jimbaroo.
Jimbaroo, getting the kids, outside is quite key, and general play. Being aware that these, tablets that we tend to use are very two-dimensional, that they're not stimulating the peripheral vision. It is very, central vision, orientated, and, to the detriment of the development of the visual process.
Yeah, and I'll just add there as well, really valuing crawling. It's such an amazing milestone on so many levels, but including that visual processing component. And I really don't think it's very respected in our culture. It's kind of a milestone that a lot of people are happy to rush through.
Yeah, the crawling process and when children can walk, but also too about some of the birth events or adverse birth events. I find those quite key to sort of me understanding about where the child is up to. Sometimes things can happen too fast and they walk, too early, and sometimes they start this process of walking a little bit too late. And I find that's a key, indicator for me for movement system development, and also too where there's not enough crawling or when there's some commando crawl and the crawling process has not been, a smooth. I think the term is, bum shuffling or, commando crawl, where there's a few little idiosyncrasies with the crawling process, and that can tell me a little bit about how the fine motor skill of using the eyes is performing as well.
Yeah, and I've got to add too, that alone is a bit of a takeaway. I think probably from the first time I spoke with you was that fine motor skills, with my teacher hat on, we very much think about the fingers and hands. But, fine motor skills is also the feet and the toes, and it's in and around the mouth, and it's the eyes as well. So when educators who are listening in are programming, you're most welcome to talk about fine motor skills just as the hands, but it's really important to know that it incorporates these other areas of the body too.
Yeah, most definitely. Fine motor, there's, as you say, the oral attributes, the eyes, the hands, and the feet, which I don't really think about too much unless I really delve into the rhythmic movements, but it's all quite relevant. And, I find that's a key thing to get, to remediate, in our thinking, at least anyway, before we go on to the higher level functions. So yeah, it's quite important.
So thank you for sharing all that you have. It's been a very enlightening episode for me, and I'm sure that it has been for everyone else as well. I would love to hear where we can find you.
Yeah, I'm Sleeman Optometry. I'm on the central coast of New South Wales, so Chittaway Bay. I do look at I do standard eye things that you would think about, like glasses and contact lenses, but certainly where parents are interested, we can do a deep dive into the visual processing elements, and give some suggestions about where they can go, not just necessarily visual issues, but other issues as well. So that's how we look at it.
Brilliant. And you've got a website too with a fair bit of info on as well for those who aren't local.
Sure. sleemanoptometry.com.au.
Okay, brilliant. So thanks again, James. And that brings us to the end of this episode. So please, I would love for you to take a moment to leave a rating and review of the Thriving Children podcast in iTunes. And until next time, take care.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.